Right. So that gives us a little bit of time for an introduction to our next presenter who will join us online. So we do have Dr. Rachel Olsen, who is a citizen of the Hwech'in, who will be talking us through some information around community-based research. And what does that really mean? What are some of the successes? What are some of the challenges? And she'll highlight a couple of projects in particular. But if we can give a welcome to Rachel as she joins us. I'm not even sure from where, Rachel. Are you in Dawson right now?
I'm Dawson. I'm in Vancouver, unfortunately.
All right, well, welcome. I will hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I am currently today. I was supposed to be in that room in the Dawson hub, and I'm really sad that I couldn't make it there. I'm currently at home on the Tsleil-Waututh Reserve here in North Vancouver. Just quickly to introduce myself, thanks for the introduction. Sorry if I repeat it. My name is Rachel Olsen. I'm a citizen of Hwech'in. My academic background, I have a PhD in social anthropology with a focus on medical anthropology. And I am currently the president and one of the founding directors of the Firelight Group, which I'll talk about just in a little bit. And other things that might be interesting, might not be interesting, but I'm an honorary member of the National Indigenous Council of Midwives. And I'm also the co-chair of the Indigenous Advisory Committee for the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. So that's a couple of the little things that I do in my work. So just quickly, I'll tell you where I'm coming from in terms of the work that we do. So I am one of the founding directors of Firelight. We're an Indigenous-owned research consulting firm. So we work directly for Indigenous nations and organizations providing research and support services across Canada from coast to coast to coast. We've been around since 2009. We've grown, we keep growing. You know, it's very exciting, very interesting work that we've really based our work as Indigenous nations and communities as our clients. So we work for them almost exclusively. Our core values are relationships, accountability, and quality. And I really think about those things in everything we do, including, you know, talking about what community-based research really is and what it means to do it. I'll just tell you a really quick story. So in thinking about this talk and what I wanted to kind of share with you, often I have in my role at Firelight, we have academic researchers come and talk to us and ask for advice on how to engage and do good work in community. And I remember this one professor came, they'd just gotten a big grant to do this work up in the far north. They had, you know, got the funding, they had written the research proposal, the budget was allocated, there was enough money for him and a graduate student to travel to the north to conduct research. And after hearing all of that, then he said, and we really want this work to be community-based and community-driven. And so it really got me thinking, well, what does that really mean when you've decided what the proposal is, you've allocated the funding, and you already know what you're going to do? How does that actually become not more than just the words that you say when you say you're doing research with an Indigenous nation? And so with those thoughts in mind, that's how I began thinking about what I wanted to share with you today. And so the first project, so I'm going to talk about two projects quickly. The first one is probably the most relevant. It was a project that we did over the past couple years with TH. So it was part of the Yukon government's COVID-19 recovery research program to think about the mental and physical health needs of Yukon First Nation citizens to inform pandemic recovery efforts. So what we had proposed to do, what we did was a community survey and also in community engagement sessions with TH staff, healthcare professionals, education professionals, and community service providers. And I'm not going to talk to you about the results of it, but I just want to talk a little bit about some of the interesting sort of considerations that came up during the process. Although I will tell you what we focused on. So the questions we really pertain to the impacts of the pandemic on key mental wellness and health services in Dawson, the impacts of the pandemic on mental health and wellness of TH citizens, challenges faced by service providers, and the importance of cultural programming. And so those are really the kind of the areas of focus that we work to develop what that focus was with the TH staff that were working with us. So some of the key considerations with this project, and I'll say that, you know, considerations, challenges, opportunities are all part of it. The project was community initiated, so the previous ED had reached out to me directly and asked if I would be willing to co-create a research proposal with them, saying that they had very limited time to do it, but they would support something if Firelight would put forward a research proposal to work on these issues. So so that was the first step, was that, you know, that ask did come from the nation. And then once that happened and we got the funding, the interesting thing was we were still really in the middle of a pandemic, and the community was still responding to, you know, current immediate serious needs in the nation, and wasn't necessarily in a place to take a step back and reflect and do research. There was also staff turnover, so kind of the file, you know, as things do, things happen, things get passed from person to person, and then suddenly someone's like, why is this on my desk? I don't even know what this means, this research project. And so it became a little bit of, I would say, I felt like it was a burden. And not that people didn't think it was important, but it was just another job that people had to do in a way at a time when they were already doing probably more than what they were supposed to be doing in their current positions. And so timing became really, really important. Thinking about, you know, the funding timeline, and I'll say that this funding program from the Yukon government was really, really great in being very reflexive and responsive to extending the timeline and recognizing some of those challenges in meeting like a March 31st deadline. So we did get like a really nice big extension on the project, which was really super helpful, because then it felt like we had the time to step back and not sort of be pushy researchers coming in when people are all busy. Well, you'll kind of always feel like that anyway, but we didn't have to do it right away. And so having that time, that longer time to do the same amount of work was really super helpful. Having the flexible funding to be able to extend those funding envelopes to the next fiscal year was really, really important in the success of this program. The other really important thing that I wanted to talk about was, you know, we had a really flexible and responsive methods development approach. And really that meant, so we started off with an online survey that was excessively long, I would say, and only one person filled it in. And I'm very grateful to that one person, but it wasn't landing. And so we hired a TH citizen as our community research coordinator, who took one look at the survey and was like, Rachel, what are you doing? Nobody's gonna answer this. Tell me exactly what you want to know. And so we rewrote the survey into a shorter, more succinct survey. And then instead of it being an online survey, our TH community coordinator did the surveys over the phone. And really, I don't think we would have got the feedback or the information that we got for this study if it hadn't been for Lydia Olsen stepping in and saying, hold on, this doesn't actually land with where we're at right now. This is how you need to do things. And we said, absolutely, you know, we're gonna follow your lead, and that's what we're gonna do. And the other piece of it, I think, that I wanted to talk about was when you're doing community-based research, when you're doing this kind of work, and the community priorities are really on responding to a situation and they're not on doing the research, what do you do? And it's a real thing. People have priorities that are immediate and important. And when I come in as a researcher, I think the research is the most important thing to me, but I'm not but you can't sort of position yourself to say, you know what, you have to take extra time to spend it with me. So really thinking about that and how to work with the community and with the timelines in a way that isn't intrusive or more of a burden for people. And the other piece of it that is may be related, but I'm not totally sure, is that when that funding comes externally, I find in my experience, there's two main types of projects that I work on in my work. One is we get hired directly by a community to do some kind of research in relation to, it could be a wide variety of topics. For example, I do a lot of Indigenous knowledge work that communities hire me for in relation to resource development projects or potential resource development projects. And the attention and sort of the focus and the willingness to participate in those studies when you're hired directly by the nation is completely different than, I would say, a project where the funding and everything is external to the community. So even though a nation might say, yes, I support this research project, when it actually comes down to the practice of it, because the funding and everything is outside of where they are at that moment, it doesn't necessarily become prioritized within their work. Again, it's a generalization. I know it's not always true, but in my experience, generally, that's what a generalization is, I guess. So that was that project. And I also just wanted to quickly talk a little bit. Actually, I think I'm talking pretty fast, so I have some time. Is another research project that was actually funded by the BC-SPOR unit, and it was called Decolonizing Birth Research, Indigenous Researchers, Clinicians, and Communities Measuring Respect During Childbearing. So this was a collaborative grant from YSPOR that went to the Birthplace Lab at UBC and was also partnered with by the Firelight Group through me, and then also the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba, which is Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck, one of my colleagues. And so the point of this study was really to determine and develop culturally safe ways to measure the lived experiences and factors associated with respect, disrespect, racism, implicit bias, and mistreatment during healthcare in Indigenous communities, and to co-develop a roadmap, which is interesting. Everyone's doing roadmaps now. I guess it's a good word to say, for Indigenous communities to lead maternity care research that promotes autonomy, cultural safety, and decolonizes birth research. So really what this project was we were going to engage with 5 Indigenous nations across British Columbia, hire a community lead or a community co-researcher, and with the general topics of respect, disrespect, racism, mistreatment within childbirth and birth research, co-develop a method and a way of gathering information that could contribute to this roadmap to decolonizing birth research. So it was a pretty straightforward project. However, I would say that there were aspects of it that were quite interesting, I think, in terms of not only the summary of what we found during the research, but also how the research came to be. So some of the key considerations for this project is our research team supported 3 principal investigators, 3 PIs. So there was myself, Dr. Phillips-Beck, as well as Dr. Saraswati Vadam, who is a settler immigrant researcher with an academic position at UBC. So the funding flowed through the university for the project. And I think that, so I am going to talk about funding a lot at this moment, and sorry if I think it's important. So I'll just talk about it. That it was really interesting in that what we did as a team was we really challenged, I would say, the funding model that currently is in place, where the funder gives the funding to the UBC, and then all of the sort of the payments and honorariums and everything go through the UBC process and the UBC administrative process. What we wanted to do to decolonize the process was to transfer almost all of the funding, I would say 90% of the funding, to the Firelight Group, an Indigenous organization, to administer the funding. And we did this for a couple of really, I think, important reasons. One is that a part of the project, we were going to hire an Indigenous research fellow, but we wanted to identify that person, and we wanted to identify that person as a knowledge holder, and not within the criteria of the staffing requirements at UBC. So which level people could be at, depending on what kind of degree they had. So we had an amazing Indigenous midwife be our research fellow for a period of the project. But she had a bachelor in midwifery, so automatically on that UBC scale, she was at the lower end, but the value to our project didn't correspond with the pay scale at UBC. So we wanted to pay her directly through the Firelight Group, which is what we could do because we didn't have any barriers to our administrative process is very minimal in comparison to a large university. And the other piece of it was we wanted to also pay the community researchers and pay their invoices very quickly, and also reimburse expenses on a very quick basis, because you hire someone as a community researcher, and then we want the flexibility to either give them funds up front so that they can pay for honorariums or pay for a lunch or whatever they're doing through their engagement in community, whereas the UBC process was a little bit more onerous than what we could provide at Firelight. So it turns out that universities don't really like it when you take almost the whole grant and give it to somebody else. So we had to work really, really hard. And credit to Dr. Videm for really fighting the good fight and meeting with UBC lawyers and explaining why we're doing this the way we're doing it, and really getting that possible so that we could transfer that funding to an Indigenous organization. The second piece of it was the ethics approval, which was it was along the same lines in that we had identified we hadn't really identified the 5 communities that we wanted to work with. We wanted it to be sort of an iterative process where we were working through our networks and who was interested and who wanted to be a part of the project. But in order to get the UBC ethics approval, we needed the signed letters from each nation saying that they would be willing to participate in the project. And the funding was held until we got the ethics approval. But our position was, well, we need to compensate those community researchers and those nations for doing the work to get to the place where they were ready to sign up and say, yes, we want to be a part of this project. And so we recognize that all of that work leading up to saying, yes, we want to be a part of this project is basically unpaid volunteer time on behalf of the nation, and that wasn't really a decolonizing research process. And so we had a lot of back and forth trying to understand how we could release funding to support nations to get to the ethics approval process. The final piece of it was data ownership. So really OCAP in action. So, FNIGC has put, I'm sure everyone's heard of OCAP: ownership, control, access, and possession of First Nations data specifically. And within this project, we really said to each community coordinator, this information that you're collecting for this project it belongs to your community. You guys decide what you're sharing with the research team. So, as much as we wanted transcripts or audio recordings, some communities took that and decided that they weren't going to share that. It was too personal. The information was it just wasn't, they wanted to keep it safe, and they didn't want it to go into a university context where, it might be used in some publications. So they provided the research team summaries of the data and summaries of information. And that was what the research team worked with in order to complete the project. But I really felt very proud of us for not, just because they got funding to do the work didn't mean that they owed us everything that was collected, especially on a topic that is so sensitive and important and personal for people. So those are my two examples. And my final thoughts and questions, and these aren't particularly worded in the best way, I would say, but my final thoughts turned out to be questions. So when we're doing community-based, community-driven research, are we spending our time working with institutions or working around them in order to do the work we need to do in the way that it needs to be done? And the second question is, how can we create a research environment that supports and grows Indigenous-led and community-based work in the true meaning of what that is? And the third question is, how do we shift our current funding structures and research processes in ways that truly see the value and potential contributions that we as Indigenous researchers can bring to these questions that are important to our nations and our future generations? So that was my presentation, and again, being online is a bit weird. I'm just sitting in my room talking, and I'm hoping that it's making sense to people. So thank you so much for taking the time and allowing me to participate. I really appreciate it. Masicho.
Absolutely amazing, Rachel. I think that touches on so many points, whether that's in research or other community-based work and engagement in our communities, for sure. We have a bit of time here. I think we have about 15 minutes. So any questions or thoughts for Rachel, either in here in the room or online? All right, I think we have Bronwyn and then Amy.
Hi, Rachel. It's Bronwyn. Nice to see you online. Thank you for your presentation. And maybe because we have a little bit of time, I'll ask. So we had a presentation this morning about a project that looked at COVID-19 impacts in Old Crow. And so I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a little bit more on what you and your team heard with the research that you did with Hwech'in. In part, so we in the audience can think about what we heard with Hwech'in and where there are similarities and differences. Can you elaborate a little bit on that part of the project? Thanks.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Nice to see you too. So really some of our key findings for TH citizens, it was really about sort of the negative effects of isolation. So, not being able to see and support loved ones in the same way as we are used to doing, increases in substance use and also a return to substance use. And that there was also noted effects on youth, so lack of social connection, that increase in risky behaviors, and that feeling of loss and all of those kinds of things that happened during COVID. So I think some of the strengths and challenges that we heard were really around the leadership of the nation of TH in the pandemic response. So the communication and transition, being up to date and really being looked to and relied upon as leadership in the community in terms of what was happening with COVID, and also appropriate responses and adaptation to the pandemic. It was, also a shift. Well, it was also just a strengthening and a growing of the cultural and land-based programming that was also already happening at the nation, and really turning an emphasis on that as a safer way to gather and be together. And that there was just really a lot of innovation and creativity in terms of how services were being provided. And then, and thinking about, phoning elders and making sure that, people felt connected still, and delivering groceries and all of those kinds of things. So I would say that a lot of the challenges from the service providers we talked to was the lack of physical spaces that were really in compliance with COVID, and really the reduced opportunities for those services to collaborate with one another. And it was pretty interesting in some of the services, people really felt like the measures that were put in place eroded some of the trust that they had with their clients and with the community members. So, having to sign in at the First Nation office, or not being allowed to sort of have coffee, or those. This is also, things have changed since then, but this is during sort of the height of the pandemic that that really, that trust that was built up between organizations and services with community members and clients for particular services really felt like there was a setback, and that there was that needed to be rebuilt again. So once things lessened, that we had to sort of start to rebuild those relationships and make sure that that trust was once again being built. The recommendations that came out of the report, we really found that people, told us to increase efforts in recruitment of First Nations professionals. We all know this, within the health and wellness workforce. Provide capacity funding, more funding for land-based programming, incentivize professionals to stay in the Yukon longer. So, continuity and, high rates of turnover of health professionals, of mental health supports was identified as an issue. Again, that's pretty common in the North, but really, again, was very evident in Dawson, and establish a program. And again, it was interesting. So infrastructure became an important issue. So looking at connectivity, and so if things move to Zoom, but actually, if your connections aren't fast enough to maintain a Zoom meeting, where does that leave people who are trying to access programs in new ways? So really focusing on, the technological infrastructure that needs to be in place, as well as the physical infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to provide services in a way that you can still be compliant with pandemic measures, but still be able to do the work that we need to be doing. And those were the findings.
Thanks, Rachel. I have another question here in the room.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, my name is Amy, and I am new with the BC-SPOR unit. I'm on secondment from the Yukon Government Health and Social Department. And I don't know if I have a question in here, and I'll try not to ramble. I have a lot of gratitude for how you presented your information, and specifically around the funding, actually, because my experience and observations in the health system is a chunk of the power for sure follows the money. And the way you described the amount of work to decolonize the process within the research, that was going for a different outcome, I think is really valuable for those of us who do either work in government systems or in big bureaucratic structures, and then your reflection on, am I working in this system, working to change the system, working around the system, and then for all of us that interact with those big systems to think about when those colonial structures kind of raise up their hackles, it probably means you're on the right path. And so, keep going. So I just want to offer gratitude and also a recognition of the incredible amount of additional labor that Indigenous organizations are having to manage in that space in terms of altering every step of the path. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Are there any other questions for Rachel? Oh, we got one over here. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your presentation. It was really great to listen to. My name is Lindsay. I am one of the Yukon University practical nursing instructors, but I do also have some experience in research that actually looked at a very similar topic, looking at how these structures can cause barriers that prevent community self-determination. One of the big findings was looking at these funding structures and how they really shape what what communities can and can't do because of the methods through which the resources and power are distributed. And so I found it super interesting to hear how you were challenging it and were able to distribute the money through the second organization, not UBC. And I was just wondering if you would have any more description, like if you want to address how that process went and what you did to be able to change that distribution structure.
Great. So two things came to mind, and really this was led from, it was really about having a colleague and an ally in the university as a co-PI that made all the difference, who was willing to go and fight for this process to change. There was a lot of conversation with the lawyer and the legal team in order to get that funding taken out of the university and put within the Indigenous organization. And I was not a part of those conversations with legal, but I was a part of the conversations with the ethics board, which was pretty interesting. We actually had a meeting with the chair of the UBC ethics, and their response was, well, we only ever give ethics approval to work that is community driven and community led. And I was like, oh, I just wish that were true. But it took a lot, I think, of work to have those meetings and have those conversations to, resubmit to ethics. And ethics is really important too. I don't want to dismiss, doing ethical research and getting ethics approval for things, but trying to work in a way, it just really took a lot of meetings, multiple meetings with both the larger ethics board as well as with the chair directly in order to get the process move forward. But we did it, and we ended up being successful, but I think we just kept pushing it and didn't drop it. I think that was probably, and having that internal person fighting for us at the university level was key to that whole process.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. We do have one last question here, and then we'll be able to close this one out. Just one moment.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Claire. I work with Hwech'in Zeta, the Northwest Territories Sport Support Unit. I am also a PhD student, so this is more a question coming from my role as a hopeful researcher, aspiring researcher one day. I'm not Indigenous, so I would be outsider to any community that I want to do research with. Thinking about this hypothetical scenario of the PI that is outsider to community, thinking about, or let's go with the assumption that the research is done well, people were compensated for their time, the work aligned with OCAP, I still struggle to reconcile the part where the PI goes on to benefit for the rest of their life from having done the work. What is the comparable that communities are left with for years and years to come? And where is the responsibility for the PI to continue the work after the research is done? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that topic.
That's a really super good question. I think, what do I think? I think that, it's funny, I have a lot of staff, and some of my staff always, they would never, the staff that are settlers would never author a report. They don't want their name on anything. They don't think it's appropriate. So that's very, very different than, being in an academic institution, but they would co-author with somebody. So I think thinking about it in that way, and, I go back to the principles of Firelight, our organization, and I'm very proud of our principles. We just changed them last year to relationships, accountability, and quality. So I really think that if you think about it through that lens, that relationship shouldn't really end when you're done your dissertation, and but how it looks might change, but know that the relationships you're building are long term. or they should be long-term in whatever form they're going to take, and that you're accountable to that relationship, you're accountable to the work that you've done. And so I think that that's also really important. You know, there's lots of opportunities to participate in work and support the goals of the nation or the people that you're working with through your work, that might not be, you know, readily apparent at this moment, but in 3 years something really important might happen. And if you have that relationship and you're being accountable to the people that you've worked with, then you know there are often opportunities to contribute in really meaningful ways. And then, you know, our final principle is quality. So I feel like if you do really, really good work, and that's the most important thing, if you have all of those things together, then, you know, there's always going to be space for people to do good work in community, whether you're Indigenous or not Indigenous. I don't think that, you know, being on top of a pedestal alone, representing community work as a non-Indigenous person is ever going to happen, but you can contribute and you can do good work. You just have to work alongside someone.
Perfect.
Is objecting. I just
No,
got
I don't. I don't think so. I don't know if you caught a sound from somewhere, but I don't think anybody objected to that in the room.
Okay, I just got like a thing on my screen that went object. So sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but sorry about that. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your presentation. I think that we definitely see value in what you had to share, and I think that persistence and community push and how we make sure that those things are upheld has come through loud and clear. So big thank you to Rachel for her time today.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to hand it over to Tosh, who will lead us through her favorite aspect of door prizes.
Yes, it is my favorite time. Not that it's the end of the day favorite time, but door prizes are my favorite time.